Chapter 1. The invitation. Emily Parker's life had always been about pushing limits, whether it was exploring abandoned buildings, scaling rooftops, or diving into the unknown for her growing blog audience. But when she received the invitation to the Hollow House, her thrill-seeking spirit was tempered with an unfamiliar sense of dread. It was a rainy Thursday evening when the invitation arrived. The storm outside lashed against the windows of her small apartment, casting eerie shadows on the walls. Emily was editing her latest video when she heard a faint rustling by the front door. At first, she ignored it, assuming it was just the wind. But then she heard it again, a soft, deliberate sound, as if something was being slid under the door. Curious, Emily paused the video and walked over to the door. She hesitated for a moment before picking up the envelope, a plain black rectangle, its surface glossy and cold to the touch. There was no return address, no markings, just her name written in elegant, old-fashioned script. Inside, a single sheet of parchment held an invitation. You are cordially invited to a night of fear and discovery. The Hollow House awaits you at midnight. If you dare to uncover its secrets, come alone. This is your only chance. The words seemed to pulse on the page, each letter carefully inked as if written by hand. Emily felt a chill run down her spine. The Hollow House. She'd heard the stories, seen the grainy photos, and even watched a few amateur investigations on the internet. But none of them had ever truly captured what she was feeling now. A deep, almost primal fear mixed with an irresistible pull to explore. The stories were the stuff of urban legends, passed down through generations. The house was said to have been built in the early 1800s by a wealthy recluse, Alexander Holloway, who was rumored to have dabbled in the occult. Over the years, the house had seen countless tragedies, disappearances, murders, unexplained phenomena. Locals claimed it was cursed, that those who entered never left the same, if they left at all. Emily knew this was the kind of content that could skyrocket her blog's popularity. Her audience thrived on the supernatural and the terrifying, and this could be her chance to capture something truly unique. But as she stared at the invitation, doubt gnawed at the edges of her mind. What if the stories were true? What if she didn't make it out? Brushing aside her fears, Emily decided she couldn't pass up the opportunity. She spent the next few hours preparing, charging her camera, packing extra batteries, and making sure her flashlight was in working order. She even brought along a small first aid kit, just in case. As the clock neared midnight, Emily grabbed her gear and headed out into the storm. The drive to the Hollow House took her through winding country roads, each turn shrouded in darkness. The rain battered her windshield, the wipers struggling to keep up. The GPS flickered uncertainly, the map showing little more than a vague outline of the area. It was as if the house was in a place the world had forgotten, hidden from view and memory. When she finally reached the estate, the gates loomed before her like the jaws of some ancient beast. Rusted and twisted, they groaned open as she approached, seemingly of their own accord. Emily's heart raced as she drove through, the gravel crunching under her tires. The mansion itself was a hulking silhouette against the stormy sky, its windows dark and unwelcoming. Ivy crawled up its crumbling stone walls, and the roof sagged under the weight of years of neglect. Yet, despite its decayed state, there was an undeniable presence about the house, as if it were alive, watching her with unseen eyes. She parked the car and stepped out into the rain, the cold water soaking through her clothes almost instantly. The wind howled through the trees, carrying with it whispers she couldn't quite make out. As she approached the front door, it swung open with a loud, echoing creak, as if the house had been waiting for her. Emily hesitated on the threshold, every instinct screaming at her to turn back. But she was too far in now. Taking a deep breath, she stepped inside. The door slammed shut behind her with a deafening bang, sealing her in darkness. Emily's flashlight cut through the black, revealing a grand foyer that had seen better days. The marble floor was cracked, the ornate wallpaper peeled in long strips, and cobwebs draped the chandeliers like ghostly shrouds. She began filming, her voice shaky as she narrated her surroundings for the camera. "This is it, guys. The Hollow House. I just got in and, well, it's already living up to its reputation. This place is beyond creepy." Her footsteps echoed in the silence, the sound unnervingly loud. As she moved deeper into the house, the temperature dropped, the air growing heavy and damp. The hallways were narrow and winding, leading to rooms filled with decaying furniture and dust-covered relics from a bygone era. Suddenly, her flashlight flickered, the beam sputtering as if struggling to stay alive. Emily smacked it against her palm, trying to coax it back to full brightness. That's when she heard it, a whisper, faint and almost indistinguishable from the wind, but unmistakably human. "Emily." She froze, her breath catching in her throat. The voice had come from the staircase to her right, a grand spiral structure that disappeared into the darkness above. Every horror movie she'd ever seen screamed at her not to go up there, but something compelled her to move forward. With each step she took, the whispering grew louder, more insistent, until it was a cacophony of voices, all calling her name, pleading, warning. Emily's hand shook as she climbed, the flashlight casting long, eerie shadows on the walls. At the top of the stairs, she found herself in a long, narrow corridor lined with closed doors. Most of them were locked, but one at the very end stood slightly ajar. A faint, sickly green light seeped through the crack, pulsating like a heartbeat. Emily approached the door, her pulse quickening. She pushed it open with trembling fingers, revealing a room that seemed untouched by time. The wallpaper was a deep, rich red, and the furniture was in perfect condition, as if the room's occupant had just stepped out. But the focal point was the mirror, an enormous, ornate piece that took up nearly the entire far wall. Its surface was dark, almost black, reflecting nothing but the green light that filled the room. As Emily approached, she felt a strange pull, as if the mirror was drawing her in. She raised her camera to capture the scene, but when she looked through the viewfinder, she saw something that made her blood run cold. Her reflection was there, but it wasn't her. The figure in the mirror was twisted, its face contorted in an expression of pure terror. And then, slowly, it smiled, a wicked, unnatural grin that made Emily's stomach churn. The reflection raised a hand, pointing at something behind her. Emily spun around, her heart hammering in her chest. The room was empty. She turned back to the mirror, and her reflection was normal again, though her face was pale, her eyes wide with fear. A low, guttural growl emanated from the mirror, and Emily felt a cold, slimy hand grip her shoulder. She screamed, jerking away from the mirror, but when she turned around, no one was there. The door slammed shut, trapping her in the room. The green light intensified, casting eerie shadows that seemed to move on their own. The whispers returned, louder and more frantic, filling the room with a chorus of voices that drove deep into her mind. Emily backed into a corner, her hands clutching the camera as if it were a lifeline. The shadows began to take shape, forming into twisted figures with elongated limbs and hollow, soulless eyes. They reached for her, their touch cold and clammy, like the dead. And then, everything went black. Chapter 2. The Awakening. When Emily regained consciousness, the room was bathed in a dull gray light. The green glow was gone, replaced by the sickly morning light that filtered through the grimy windows. She was lying on the cold, hard floor, her camera beside her, its screen flickering with static. Her head throbbed, and she felt a deep, bone-chilling cold that seeped into her very core. As she sat up, the events of the night before came rushing back, the memory of the mirror, the twisted reflection, the figures in the shadows. Her heart pounded in her chest as she reached for her camera, hoping against hope that the footage had been saved. The video was there, but it was corrupted. The screen was a mess of static, distorted images and flickering shadows. But one frame was clear, a single image that sent a wave of terror through her. It was her face, frozen in a moment of pure fear, with the word "stay" scratched into the mirror behind her. Panic surged through her. She had to get out of this house. Now. Emily scrambled to her feet, her muscles stiff and aching. She rushed to the door, but it wouldn't open. The knob wouldn't turn, and the wood felt cold and unyielding under her hands. She slammed her fists against the door, shouting, but the house remained silent, as if mocking her attempts to escape. Desperation set in. She turned to the windows, hoping to break one and climb out, but they too were sealed shut, the glass thick and unbreakable. The walls seemed to close in around her, the air growing heavy and oppressive. Emily forced herself to stay calm, to think rationally. There had to be a way out, some way to escape this nightmare. She had survived worse, hadn't she? As she searched the room, she noticed something she hadn't seen before. A small, leather-bound book lying on the bedside table. It was old, the leather cracked and faded, but something about it drew her in. She picked it up, her fingers trembling as she opened it. The pages were filled with strange symbols and diagrams, incomprehensible scribbles that made no sense to her. But as she flipped through the book, she found a page that had been dog-eared, the only page with writing she could understand. The hollow house feeds on fear, on the despair of those who enter its walls. It traps its victims in a cycle of torment, drawing them deeper into its darkness until they are lost forever. The only way to break free is to face the darkness, to confront the source of its power. But beware, once you have entered the house, it will never truly let you go. Emily's blood ran cold. The house was alive, feeding on her fear, trapping her in a nightmare that would never end. She had to find the source of its power, the darkness that controlled the house, and destroy it. But where to start? The house was a maze, filled with countless rooms and corridors, each one more twisted than the last. She had no idea where the source of the darkness could be, or how to find it. As she pondered her next move, a sound caught her attention. A faint, rhythmic tapping coming from the other side of the door. Emily's heart skipped a beat. Was someone else in the house? Had someone come to rescue her? She approached the door cautiously, pressing her ear against the wood. The tapping continued, steady and deliberate, as if someone were knocking lightly with their knuckles. Taking a deep breath, Emily called out, "Hello? Who's there?" The tapping stopped abruptly. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then, a voice, soft and barely audible, whispered through the door, "Emily, help me." Her blood froze. The voice was familiar, too familiar. It sounded just like her own. Emily backed away from the door, her heart pounding in her chest. The voice repeated the plea, growing more desperate, more insistent. "Help me, Emily. Please. Don't leave me here." She shook her head, trying to clear her thoughts. This had to be a trick, another one of the house's twisted games. But the voice, it was so real, so full of pain and fear. Before she could decide what to do, the door creaked open, revealing a dark, narrow corridor. The walls were lined with mirrors, each one reflecting her pale, terrified face. The voice continued to echo through the corridor, calling her name, begging for help. Emily knew she had to follow it, that it was the only way to find the source of the darkness and end this nightmare. But every instinct screamed at her to turn back, to run as far away from this house as she could. She steeled herself, clutching the book tightly in one hand and her camera in the other. With a deep breath, she stepped into the corridor, the door closing behind her with a soft click. The corridor seemed to stretch on forever, the mirrors distorting her reflection into twisted, nightmarish forms. The voice grew louder, more frantic, urging her to hurry, to find it before it was too late. At the end of the corridor, she found a door, old and weathered, its surface covered in strange symbols that glowed faintly in the darkness. Emily hesitated, her hand hovering over the knob. This was it. Whatever was behind this door was the key to ending the nightmare. She turned the knob, the door creaking open to reveal a dark, circular chamber. In the center of the room stood an altar, its surface covered in the same glowing symbols. And on the altar lay a book, identical to the one she held in her hands, but larger, more imposing. As she approached the altar, the air grew colder, the darkness pressing in around her. The voice had stopped, replaced by a low, rumbling growl that seemed to come from the very walls of the chamber. Emily reached for the book, her fingers brushing against its cold, leathery surface. The moment she touched it, a surge of darkness shot through her, and the symbols on the altar flared to life, casting the chamber in an eerie, pulsating glow. The book's pages began to turn on their own, stopping at a page filled with strange, indecipherable text. Emily stared at the words, her mind struggling to make sense of them. But then, the text shifted, forming words she could understand. The house has chosen you. Embrace the darkness, or be consumed by it. Emily's heart raced. She could feel the house closing in around her, its darkness creeping into her mind, trying to take hold. She had to resist, to fight back, to destroy the source of its power before it consumed her completely. But as she tried to pull away, the book held her fast, its pages flipping faster and faster. The growl grew louder, shaking the very foundation of the chamber. Shadows began to move around her, forming into the same twisted figures she had seen in the mirrors, their hollow eyes fixed on her. They circled her, closing in, their whispers growing louder, more insistent. There is no escape. Surrender. Emily knew she couldn't give in. She had to fight, to survive, no matter what. With a surge of determination, she ripped her hand away from the book, the force of her will shattering the connection. The chamber shuddered, the symbols flickering as if the house itself was reacting to her defiance. The figures recoiled, their whispers turning to shrieks of anger. Emily seized the moment and ran. She darted through the chamber, searching for an exit. The walls began to close in, the chamber collapsing around her. But she didn't stop. She had to escape, to survive. In the far corner of the chamber, she spotted a narrow passageway, just wide enough for her to squeeze through. She scrambled toward it, the ground shaking beneath her feet, the walls crumbling behind her. As she entered the passage, the darkness seemed to reach out, trying to pull her back, but she pushed forward. The passage twisted and turned, leading her deeper into the unknown, but she could feel the house's grip weakening. Finally, she emerged into a small, dimly lit room. The air was thick with dust, and the only light came from a single flickering candle on a wooden table. On the table was a key, old and rusted, but clearly important. Emily hesitated, but the sound of the collapsing chamber pushed her forward. She grabbed the key and turned to leave, but the door she had entered through was gone. The room was sealed, and the only other exit was a narrow staircase leading upward. With no other choice, she climbed the stairs, the sound of her footsteps echoing in the silence. The staircase seemed to go on forever, winding upward in a spiral. But Emily didn't stop, driven by the desperate need to escape. At the top of the staircase, she found herself in a familiar hallway, the second floor of the hollow house. But something was different. The air was colder, and the walls were covered in the same strange symbols she had seen in the chamber below. As she walked down the hallway, the symbols began to glow, casting an eerie light that illuminated her path. The whispers returned, softer this time, as if the house was watching her, waiting. Finally, she reached a door at the end of the hall. It was the same door she had entered the night before, the one that led to the room with the mirror. But now, the door was locked. Emily's heart pounded as she inserted the key into the lock. It turned with a loud click, and the door creaked open. Inside, the room was exactly as she had left it, the mirror standing against the far wall. But as she stepped inside, the door slammed shut behind her, and the room plunged into darkness. The mirror glowed faintly, reflecting not her image, but the same twisted figure that had haunted her since she entered the house. The figure stepped out of the mirror, its eyes locking onto hers. Emily backed away, but there was nowhere to go. The figure advanced, its form shifting, growing darker and more monstrous with each step. Emily realized with a start that this was no mere reflection. This was the house itself, the dark force that had been pulling the strings all along, and it wanted her. But Emily wasn't ready to give in. She had survived this long, and she wasn't going to let the hollow house take her now. Summoning every ounce of strength she had left, she lunged at the figure, the mirror shattering as she collided with it. There was a blinding flash of light, and the world around her exploded into chaos. Emily felt herself being pulled into the darkness, the house collapsing in on itself, the walls crumbling, the floor giving way beneath her feet. But she didn't let go. She fought against the pull, her mind focused on one thing: survival. And then, just as suddenly as it began, everything went silent. Chapter 3. The Revelation. Emily awoke in a cold sweat, the taste of dust and decay still lingering in her mouth. She was lying on the floor of the hollow house's foyer, the morning light filtering through the cracked windows. The house was silent, the oppressive atmosphere that had clung to it before now gone. She sat up, her head pounding as she tried to piece together what had happened. The last thing she remembered was the mirror, the figure stepping out of it, and then nothing. Her camera lay beside her, miraculously intact. She picked it up, her hands shaking as she checked the footage. The video was clear, showing everything that had happened in the chamber, the figures, the book, the symbols, all of it. But as she watched, she noticed something strange. The figure that had stepped out of the mirror was not some monstrous apparition. It was her, or at least, it looked like her. The figure's face was hers, but twisted, darkened by the house's influence. It moved like her, spoke like her, but there was something deeply wrong, something that made Emily's skin crawl. As she watched, the figure turned to the camera and smiled, a cruel, knowing smile that sent a shiver down her spine. It was as if the figure knew she would watch this footage, knew that she would see it. And then the figure spoke, its voice distorted, echoing through the empty house. "You can't escape, Emily. The hollow house will always be with you. You are part of it now. You belong to it." Emily dropped the camera, her heart racing. The house had left its mark on her, a mark that she couldn't erase, no matter how far she ran. She stood up, her legs shaky, and made her way to the front door. It was unlocked, swinging open easily as she pushed against it. Outside, the storm had passed, leaving the world eerily quiet. She stepped out into the sunlight, the fresh air filling her lungs, and for a moment she felt free. But as she walked away from the house, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching her, following her. Emily didn't stop until she reached her car. She drove away from the hollow house, her mind racing, her heart pounding. But even as the house disappeared in her rearview mirror, she knew that it wasn't truly gone. It was part of her now, a shadow that would follow her wherever she went. As she drove, the whispers returned, faint but unmistakable. "You belong to us, Emily. You can never escape." She gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles white. She had survived the hollow house, but the horror was far from over. The house had taken a part of her, a part that she could never get back. But Emily wasn't ready to give up. She had fought the house and won, at least for now. And she would keep fighting, no matter what. Because she knew that the hollow house wasn't just a place. It was a force, a darkness that could never be truly defeated. And it would come for her again. But when it did, she would be ready. Chapter 4. The Aftermath. In the weeks that followed, Emily tried to return to her normal life. She edited and uploaded the footage from the hollow house, but something about the video was off. The audio was distorted, and strange images flickered in the background, faces in the shadows, whispers that weren't hers. Her bloggers noticed too, flooding the comments with questions and theories. Some thought it was all part of the show, a clever trick to increase views. Others were genuinely concerned, sensing the darkness that had followed her out of the house. But Emily knew the truth. The house had marked her, and no matter how hard she tried to move on, it wouldn't let her go. The whispers grew louder at night, and the shadows in her apartment seemed to move on their own. She began to see things, dark figures lurking in the corners of her vision, the twisted reflection from the mirror staring back at her from shiny surfaces. Sleep became a distant memory. Every time she closed her eyes, she was back in the hollow house, the darkness closing in around her. She started to lose track of time, days blending into nights, her mind a fog of fear and exhaustion. Her friends noticed the change in her. They asked if she was okay, but Emily couldn't bring herself to tell them the truth. How could she explain that the house was still with her, that it was inside her mind, twisting her thoughts, feeding on her fear? One night as she sat in her apartment, staring at the distorted footage on her computer, she made a decision. She couldn't keep living like this. She had to confront the darkness, to face the hollow house one last time and end it, once and for all. Emily packed her bags, bringing only the essentials, her camera, her flashlight, the leather-bound book she had taken from the house. She didn't tell anyone where she was going, didn't leave a note. She just drove, the whispers growing louder the closer she got to the house. When she arrived, the hollow house was exactly as she had left it, standing silent and imposing against the darkening sky. The air was thick with an unnatural stillness, as if the house was waiting for her. She stepped out of the car, her heart pounding, and approached the front door. It swung open with a creak, welcoming her back into its darkness. Emily hesitated on the threshold, every instinct screaming at her to turn back. But she knew she couldn't. She had to end this, to break free from the house's grip, before it consumed her completely. She entered the house, the door closing behind her with a soft click. The air inside was cold and stale, the faint smell of decay lingering in the darkness. Emily turned on her flashlight, the beam cutting through the black, revealing the grand foyer she had seen before. But something was different this time. The house felt more alive, more aware of her presence. The walls seemed to pulse with a dark energy, the whispers growing louder, echoing through the empty halls. "Welcome back, Emily." The voice sent a shiver down her spine. It was the same voice she had heard in the mirror, the twisted reflection that had haunted her since she left the house. Emily steeled herself, gripping the flashlight tightly as she made her way deeper into the house. The path was familiar, but the house seemed to twist and change around her, the corridors longer, the rooms darker. She found her way back to the chamber with the altar, the book still lying in the center. The symbols on the walls glowed faintly, casting eerie shadows that seemed to move on their own. Emily approached the altar, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew what she had to do. She had to destroy the book, to break the house's hold on her once and for all. But as she reached for the book, the shadows around her began to shift, forming into the same twisted figures she had seen before. They surrounded her, their hollow eyes fixed on her, their whispers growing louder. "You can't escape. You belong to us." Emily felt the darkness closing in around her, the house tightening its grip, but she refused to give in. She grabbed the book, her fingers trembling, and tore it from the altar. The house shuddered, the walls vibrating as if in pain. The figures shrieked, their forms flickering as the symbols on the walls began to dim. Emily knew she had to act fast. She opened the book, her eyes scanning the pages for the key to ending this nightmare. The text was incomprehensible, the symbols shifting and changing before her eyes. But then she saw it, a single sentence that stood out from the chaos, clear and unmistakable. To break the curse, one must confront the darkness within. Emily realized with a start that the darkness wasn't just in the house. It was inside her, feeding on her fear, her despair. She had to face it, to confront the part of herself that the house had twisted and corrupted. Taking a deep breath, she closed her eyes, focusing on the darkness within her mind. The whispers grew louder, more frantic, but she didn't let them take control. She pushed through the fear, the despair, and found the source of the darkness, the twisted reflection that had haunted her. It was there, deep inside her mind, a dark, distorted version of herself, feeding on her fear, her pain. But now, Emily wasn't afraid. She faced the reflection head-on, refusing to let it control her any longer. "I'm not yours," she said, her voice steady. "You don't control me." The reflection snarled, its form shifting, growing darker, more monstrous. But Emily stood her ground, refusing to give in. She reached out, her hand closing around the reflection, and squeezed. The darkness shattered, the reflection dissolving into nothingness. The whispers stopped, the figures around her flickering out of existence. The house shuddered one last time, the walls groaning as if in defeat. And then, everything went still. Emily opened her eyes, the chamber bathed in a soft, golden light. The book lay on the altar, its pages blank, the symbols gone. The house was silent, the oppressive atmosphere lifted. She had done it. She had broken the curse, freed herself from the house's grip. The darkness was gone, and she was finally free. Emily left the house, stepping out into the morning light. The air was fresh, the sky clear, as if the storm had never happened. She felt lighter, the weight of the house lifted from her shoulders. As she walked away, she couldn't help but smile. She had faced the darkness, and won. And now, she was finally free. But as she drove away, she glanced in the rearview mirror and saw something that made her blood run cold. In the reflection, just for a moment, she saw the house, standing tall and imposing against the horizon. And in one of the windows she saw a figure watching her, its hollow eyes fixed on her as she drove away. Emily tore her eyes from the mirror, her heart racing. She knew that the house wasn't truly gone, that it would always be with her, a shadow in the back of her mind. But she was ready. She had faced the darkness once, and she would face it again, if she had to. Because now she knew the truth. The hollow house was a part of her, and she was a part of it. Chapter 5. The return. Several months had passed since Emily had last stepped foot in the hollow house. The world had returned to normal, or at least as normal as it could be after what she had experienced. Her followers continued to watch her videos, oblivious to the true horror she had faced. They praised her for her bravery, for her dedication to exploring the unknown. But Emily knew the truth. The house had left its mark on her, a mark that no amount of distance could erase. The nightmares continued, the whispers never truly gone. They were quieter now, less frequent, but always there, lurking in the back of her mind. She tried to move on, to live her life as if nothing had changed. She visited new locations, filmed new episodes, but the thrill of the hunt was gone. Every dark corner, every creaking floorboard brought her back to the hollow house. One day, as she was editing a new video, Emily received a message from an old friend, someone she hadn't spoken to in years. They had heard about her recent adventures, about the hollow house, and they wanted to talk. Curiosity piqued, Emily agreed to meet. They chose a quiet cafe, far from the city, where they could talk in peace. When she arrived, Emily immediately recognized her friend, an older woman, tall and imposing, with a sharp gaze that seemed to see right through her. They exchanged pleasantries, but it was clear that her friend had something important to discuss. As they sipped their coffee, her friend leaned in, her voice low. "I've been researching the hollow house," she said, her tone serious. "I believe there's more to it than we thought. Something darker, something ancient." Emily listened intently as her friend explained what she had discovered. Stories of the house dating back centuries, tales of people who had entered and never returned, of strange occurrences and dark rituals performed within its walls. "The house isn't just haunted," her friend continued. "It's cursed, tied to something much older, something that feeds on the fear and despair of those who enter. I think it's been doing this for a long time, collecting souls, trapping them in its walls." The words sent a shiver down Emily's spine. She had suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed was another matter entirely. "But there's something else," her friend added, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I think the house is tied to you now. Whatever you did when you broke the curse, it connected you to the house in a way that can't be undone. It's part of you, and it's not going to let you go." Emily's heart sank. She had feared this, but hearing it out loud made it all too real. "But there might be a way to break the connection," her friend said, her gaze intense. "A way to sever the house's hold on you for good, but it's dangerous, and I don't know if it will work." Emily didn't hesitate. "I'll do whatever it takes," she said, her voice firm. "I can't live like this anymore." Her friend nodded, a look of understanding in her eyes. "I thought you might say that," she said, pulling out an old leather-bound journal from her bag. "This might help. It's a record of the rituals performed in the house, the ones that tied it to the darkness. Maybe if we can reverse the rituals, we can break the connection." Emily took the journal, her hands trembling. The pages were old and fragile, filled with strange symbols and diagrams, much like the book she had found in the house. "But be careful," her friend warned. "The house won't let you go easily. It will fight back, and it will be dangerous. But if you're willing to try, I'll help you." Emily nodded, determination in her eyes. "I'm ready," she said, her voice steady. "Let's end this." Chapter 6. The Final Confrontation. The plan was simple. Return to the hollow house, perform the rituals, and break the connection once and for all. But Emily knew it wouldn't be that easy. The house would fight back, and the darkness would try to stop her. She and her friend arrived at the house late at night, the air thick with tension. The house loomed before them, its dark windows like empty eyes, watching their every move. "Are you sure you want to do this?" her friend asked, a note of concern in her voice. Emily nodded, her expression resolute. "I have to," she said. "I can't keep living like this." They entered the house, the door creaking shut behind them. The air inside was cold and heavy, the darkness almost palpable. The house was silent, but Emily could feel it watching them, waiting. They made their way to the chamber with the altar, the same room where Emily had faced the darkness before. The symbols on the walls glowed faintly, as if they were aware of their presence. Her friend laid out the journal on the altar, flipping to the page with the ritual they needed to perform. "We have to do this exactly right," she said, her voice steady. "One mistake, and we could make things worse." Emily nodded, her heart pounding. They began the ritual, chanting the ancient words, tracing the symbols in the air. The air around them grew colder, the darkness pressing in. But they didn't stop. As they continued, the house began to react. The walls trembled, the floor vibrating beneath their feet. The whispers grew louder, more frantic, as if the house was trying to stop them. "Keep going," her friend urged, her voice rising above the noise. Emily pushed through the fear, focusing on the ritual. She could feel the darkness swirling around her, trying to break her concentration, but she didn't let it. The symbols on the walls began to shift, the glow intensifying. The air crackled with energy, the house shaking violently. And then, with a final, powerful chant, the ritual reached its climax. The darkness surged, the walls closing in, the house roaring in anger. But Emily stood firm, her voice strong as she spoke the final words. There was a blinding flash of light, and the world around them exploded into chaos. The house shook violently, the walls crumbling, the darkness screaming in fury. But Emily didn't let go. She held on, her mind focused on one thing: breaking the connection, ending the house's hold on her once and for all. And then, just as suddenly as it began, everything went still. Epilogue. The new beginning. When Emily awoke, the morning sun shining down on her. The house was gone, reduced to rubble, nothing but a pile of stones and dust. Her friend was beside her, a look of relief on her face. "We did it," she said, her voice filled with awe. "It's over. The house is gone." Emily sat up, her mind still reeling. She felt different, lighter, as if a great weight had been lifted from her shoulders. The whispers were gone, the darkness no longer lurking in the corners of her mind. She was free. As they stood up and began to walk away, Emily couldn't help but glance back at the ruins of the house. It was over, but the experience had changed her. She would never forget the darkness she had faced, the horrors she had endured. But she had survived, and she was stronger for it. And as they drove away, the sun rising in the sky, Emily knew that she was finally free to start a new chapter in her life. The hollow house was gone, but the lessons she had learned would stay with her forever. And she was ready to face whatever came next.